Welcome to EAGxBerlin 2017, also from my side. Thank you all for being here. It's great to finally be able to attach faces to the online personas from Facebook and from the networking sheet that we send around to everybody. And I was reading through that yesterday and I got really excited. I started looking forward to this conference even more than I did before. I saw people from many different backgrounds at various stages in their careers, often bringing wildly different experiences to this event. And still, you can also see in the entries that this was not just any event, that these people had something in common. And I think what unified all the entries, all the bios, was people's commitment to the two core ideas of effective altruism. People's dedication to doing extraordinary amounts of good on the one hand, and going about this in a thoughtful, reasoned, and evidence-based way on the other hand. And I think the bios also illustrate what it means to put these ideas into practice. So I thought it would be good to just read out some of them to you so that you get an idea of what I mean. Rudolf, one of the participants, writes, "I'm in a postdoctoral position in mathematics. My near-term focus is on trying to excel in my role in academic research and teaching. In the meantime, I plan on modestly donating to GiveWell-recommended charities and gathering information to be better able to shape my future path towards a higher impact." Tillman, another participant, "Hi, I'm an engineer with a background in medicine and an interest in environmental topics and global health. I founded a water disinfection startup which tackles the spread of diseases in developing countries." And really, I could go on and on and on. And seeing so much talent, so much dedication come together at this kind of event is one of the reasons I enjoy the EAG conferences so much and love being a part of them. The other reason goes beyond individuals. It's this idea of being part of something bigger, being part of a community effort. And this is also something that Will McGaskill, the co-founder of the Center for Effective Altruism, talked about in his opening speech at EAG in San Francisco this year. He said we can think of effective altruism as a shared aims community. We're not just individuals working side by side but independently towards some goal. We're also not a market-based economy where people cooperate because it's in their self-interest. We're much more than that. We're a collective of people working collaboratively towards a common goal, which is a really powerful idea if you think about it. It has many advantages over the other kinds of communities that are out there. You can cooperate more easily. You can help each other out, do each other favors, even if it comes to a significant cost to yourself, because if you help other people, they're going to advance the common goal that we all have. We can also make intellectual progress more faster because we have shared terminology, we have shared assumptions about what we think about. And during this process, you then even grow to like the people that you find in this community and that you interact with, for example, at these kind of conferences. This is certainly what happened to me. You start be friends with them, and I hope that this event can be a part of that. And over time, you also maybe make effective altruism, this idea, part of who you are, part of your identity. And before you know it, you're at an EA conference wearing a blue t-shirt with a light bulb on it that says effective altruism. As you can see, that's certainly what happened to me as well, which is really awesome. I love being part of a community that celebrates doing good and going about this in a rational way. So naturally, I often want to share this excitement with other people, not just at these kind of events, but also when I talk with other people, maybe people that are not part of this community or haven't heard about it before. And I was talking about exactly this with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago in the run-up to this event. And he said something pretty interesting. When I mentioned this, he said that he was really excited for me because I had finally found my tribe. And I thought that was pretty revealing, maybe a little bit about me, but I think it can also point to a darker side of these kind of group dynamics that I sketched before. And this is something I want to go into a little bit more detail during this talk as well. And there's not really a shared or standard definition of modern tribes that I could find, at least. But I think if I had to come up with something, it would probably go something like this. You take a shared aims community, right? A couple people working towards a common purpose. Then you have strong ties between all the members in this community, and over time they build a strong and shared identity. Often that's reinforced by peculiar jargon, maybe maybe meme groups on Facebook. And I think that fits rather well with effective altruism too. And thought about it in these terms, there's the obvious problem of groupthink, that you want to be loyal to the other members in the tribe, that maybe you want to impress the quote-unquote elders and just agree with them because of status. And that leads you to defend the accepted wisdom of the community, and you don't go out of your way to challenge the things that people hold very strongly. And I think there's some of that in effective altruism. But also we found very good ways of dealing with it. We emphasize rational argument, we have a strong commitment to follow the evidence where it leads, and we have trust in the scientific community, in the scientific process. Another way of putting it, we baked the antidote to tribalism right into our tribal identity. Brilliant, if you think about it. But I think that leaves us with a more subtle risk, which is illustrated by the story of me finding out about effective altruism. And yeah, I finally found my tribe, and obviously that makes you really excited. You find people who share similar views to you, who go about solving problems in similar ways. But also, which is interesting, I had finally overnight become the smartest guy in the room. Other people just didn't get it, you know? And the way I thought about it was, if people didn't agree with me, there were really only two options. Either they were being irrational, or they were selfish jerks. But I think by now you can tell who the real jerk in this story is. And this resulted in me having this constant air of intellectual superiority around me. And the best description, or the best term I found for this, is by one of my favorite podcasters, the philosopher Tamler Summers. He describes people like me as nouveau smart. These are people who have come across something smart, they are right as far as it goes, but they don't know how to handle their new intelligence with class. And yes, this story does reflect pretty poorly on me. But it also points to a potential danger in certain movements, I think, that we need to remain mindful of. And I don't want to pick out effective altruism as the only group that might be susceptible to this. You can also think of the new atheists that are a thing in the United States, I think, mostly. Very tellingly, they try to brand themselves as brights, which I don't think is very subtle. Another group of people are a particular kind of philosophy student. You can usually tell quite easily. They have solved all of philosophy in their second year, and they're very eager to tell you. And it's interesting because it's not just regular groupthink. It's more like rationalism turned inside out. Because it takes the identity of being rational and evidence-based and twists it into something a little bit more ugly. And really there are two sides to this idea. On the one hand, if we view ourselves as particularly rational, we risk interpreting that to mean that all the answers that we reach are somehow true because of that fact. And it starts innocent enough. We reach some conclusion based on a deliberative process, for example, regarding the cause areas that we as a community should work on. And that very fact immunizes the conclusion to some extent. And that's also justified in part, because it went through that process of us talking about it. But I think we can overshoot the target sometimes, at which point we don't question the answer anymore, because after all, it was reached by rational people following a rational process. So it has to be right in some sense. In other words, over time, we grow to like the conclusions instead of the questions and the process. And the flip side to this is that if we view ourselves as particularly rational, we risk seeing all outsiders as irrational. Because these identities are often contrasted and defended against other identities, against other groups. And if we're the rational guys, The other guys have to be the irrational ones, because otherwise they would obviously join us on the right side of history. And then we start dismissing their arguments not on merit, but based on who uttered them in the first place. And taking these two ideas together, I think, has the potential of creating an echo chamber, despite being rational. And the commitment to doing good is a similarly double-edged sword. There is the danger of viewing others as not really committed, because otherwise, obviously, they would do it the effective way. Which other way is there? And then we become the worst echo chamber of all, a self-righteous one. And at best, that leaves us as ineffective jerks. And at worst, we do lots of harm despite our best intentions. And this might seem counterintuitive and far-fetched, but there is something to this, I think. And again, I think a comparison can be helpful. Many thoughtful people inside and outside of the community have argued that communism, out of all the things, is actually in the same reference class as effective altruism. And there are many similarities if you think about it. Both were started as an idea to radically improve the world based on some philosophical thought at its basis. It was then taken over by many young progressives at the time who thought this was the social change we want to advocate for. And then it was taken over by technocrats who were applying the ideas that were developed to national economies and countries. And they even had earning to give figured out. Engels was operating multiple factories in order to finance the studies of Karl Marx. Way ahead of their time. And arguably, communism ended up doing a lot more harm than good, at least so far. I don't want to offend any communists here. And this story might sound depressing, but I think it can be both encouragement and warning. The encouragement part is that communism did end up really influential. And I think effective altruism has the potential to become really influential as well. But if we do, I think we need to make sure that we use that influence responsibly. So what can we actually do to make sure we don't lose sight? This was the depressing part, now we come to the more hopeful one. I think the first important thing is that we realize that many ideas in effective altruism are quite old, and even the new ones didn't necessarily originate within the movement. Donating 10% to charity, very, very old. I couldn't find a date, but I think we can all agree on that. Utilitarianism was first proposed by Bentham in 1789, also a very long time ago. Then Peter Singer published the Drowning Child Thought Experiment in 71. Around the same time, the concept of QALY and DALY and prioritization in health interventions became a thing. RCTs became fashion in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Even GiveWall was founded before there was an EA movement to speak of. Even Nick Bostrom wrote down many of his ideas before there was a movement that could fill a room like this. So we're not as uniquely rational as we think. There are many people outside of the movement who could come up with clever ideas. The second important thing to keep in mind, I think, is that we need to keep our identity small regarding concrete conclusions. We should not confuse being rational with holding rational viewpoints, whatever that means. Instead, it should mean that we change our viewpoints whenever we're confronted with new evidence, whenever we're presented with new arguments. And in effective altruism, that's often cashed out as cause neutrality. I think it's a powerful idea. It means being open to working on the most pressing questions, even when we have to change our focus. But this will probably become more difficult over time. The movement will grow bigger, which makes communication harder, and the dissemination of new arguments more slowly. And also people will become more set in their careers. It will become harder for them to change their priorities. But still, even despite this, we should keep effective altruism an open question instead of a set of answers. The third idea here is that we should make a conscious effort to seek external criticism and feedback wherever we can. These kind of external institutions are a very important corrective for the ideas that we develop. And I think sometimes we tend to forget that. Because these people are less likely to be blinded by the same biases, by the same shortcomings that we are. So we should engage these kind of stakeholders that are adjacent to our movement wherever we work. For example, the animal rights movement. For example, groups fighting to eradicate global poverty. And also, we should strive to become part of the academic community in these kind of fields, so we can subject our ideas to the rigorous process of peer review. The last idea here is that we should cultivate a welcoming community that values different perspectives and different people, because they're going to be the ones that are going to bring in new ideas that challenge answers that we have already reached. They're going to be the ones challenging more, they're going to be challenging accepted conclusions that we might have grown too fond of over time. So we should encourage these new voices, even if they don't agree with everything we seem to agree on so far. And the good news is that effective altruism, I think, is a lot better at this than any other movement I've at least been a part of. And yeah, this is dangerous. I'm fairly young, and also because of all the reasons that I mentioned, but I think there's some evidence. I think we're good at cultivating and advocating for weird ideas, right? We took all the ideas that other people had and thought, hey, there's something to this. These people came up with clever ideas, and we took them and developed them further. The idea of artificial intelligence was certainly voiced outside of the movement first, and the threat that it might pose to humanity and its progress. People write long explanations when, how, and why they changed their views. For example, Holden Karnofsky, one of the co-founders of GiveWell, actually posted a very long article where he explained why he had changed his mind about the threat of artificial intelligence. Even more bold, people write posts subjecting effective altruism itself to a thorough critique, why it might be wrong or why specific ideas might be wrong. And they're not booted out of the movement as heretics, but often celebrated for their intellectual rigor, which is a good sign. But still, we should not get lazy, and you can do your part as well, also at this conference. So keep a lookout for things that you might change your mind about. Maybe in talks, maybe in Q&A sessions, or in individual conversations during the breaks. More concretely, as a suggestion perhaps, before you listen to a talk, think about the topic and what kind of position you have regarding this particular topic. What are things that the speaker might say that would change your mind? Is it empirical evidence? Is it a philosophical argument? Because there has to be something. Otherwise, I think you're heading down a dangerous path. Same thing with the giving game that we're running here. Think, at the beginning of the conference, where would I put it in now, the token that I was given? Which kind of cause area, which kind of organization would I support? And what would it change to change my view regarding this? And challenge other people to challenge you, because you might learn something in the process. And this is difficult, but it's also effective altruism at its best. And having said all that, I know I was being a little bit grumpy, but I think overall the advantages of being such a community outweigh the potential downsides if we remain mindful of them. I already mentioned a lot of benefits in the beginning. We can cooperate more easily, we help each other out, we think more productively, and the movement certainly wouldn't be anywhere near this point if it hadn't been for this extraordinary team effort. And lastly, it's also a lot of fun being part of such a community. I think if it sucked to be an effective altruist most of the time, many of you wouldn't be here. I certainly probably wouldn't. Because people are not just rational automata or vessels of utility, they do seek communities. Yes, with like-minded people, but also simply with nice people. Because then it feels good helping one another, because they're not jerks. Then you feel safe to express viewpoints that go against accepted wisdom and challenge other people, because you know on the other side of that conversation are people who mean really well. And we're also motivated to give it our all, because we are among like-minded and friendly people. And I think that's one of the most important new things that effective altruism brought to the world. Yes, we took a lot of old ideas, but then we developed them further, put them together, and actually ran with them. So if we're able, I think, to cultivate such a community, I feel very confident that this movement can fulfill its full potential, help solve the world's most pressing problems. Thank you.